fun news that our holiday gathering has gotten such a great response that we are in fact moving it to Aubrey Glen, where we had been several years ago. The price will continue to be $22, which is a real steal, and we're having some lovely appetizers, hors d'oeuvres, tea, coffee, and whatever else at this point. So anyway, we just found that out, the menu just a couple minutes ago. So luckily Annie was able to put that all together for us. So we're hoping to see a lot of you there. And the last day to have your RSVP in to Mimi or online to the Evite is November 20th. And you can either pay online through our website, or you can send a check to our post office box, which is 1783 Bend 97709. So however you want to pay, we'll be happy to take your money. And Mimi, did you want to talk a little bit about the parade?
Yeah, so I'll be sending out an email to all the people who RSVP'd already as yes or maybe, and I'll let you know, make sure everybody gets the word about the change of venue. And the other thing about the venue change is that there's tons of parking, and we were really, really worried about the parking at the Wisteria at the depot. So it is going to be a lot easier. I'm also going to ask you when you get my email, if you're interested in walking with us in the Bend Christmas parade, because we're going to be there with our cherry red 1950 pickup and wearing red, white, and blue and waving flags. We're taking our flag back. And so I'll be asking you for that too. So just watch for that email.
That's December
4th. And we gather for the parade. I think it's at 10, isn't it, Carol? Or somewhere right.
We'll firm all of that up as we get a little bit closer. So
it's usually right around 10
at 12.
Yeah, and then this parade starts at 12. We're usually done at 1 by the time we get, depending on where we are in line, we're usually done at 1-ish or sometime after 1, and then we're going to start the party at 2.
Perfect. All right. So the only other thing I want to mention is that Karen's been doing a fabulous job with getting speakers, and we're anxious to get started in a few minutes with our guest speaker today. And if you've had the opportunity to look at the echoes, Lauren has really put her own personal touch to it. And so it's kind of fun to see what comes out every month. And so make sure you're checking that. One of the things that came up in my monthly meeting with the state president and the other local league presidents, we were talking about memberships. And so that started to tweak my interest to see where we were, because I remember when I first moved to Bend 5 years ago, we all fit in the Big Bear without any problem. And so we went back, and Mimi was able to find in 2017, we had 51 members. 2018, it was 74. 2019, 83. 2020, 113. And we are at about 140 in February, and we've dropped a little bit now down to 134. So you can actually see the growth, and I think it's a fabulous thing, and you can feel the momentum. And what makes me so pleased with seeing all these new faces and stuff is not only are they faces, but they're also stepping up and they're saying, I think we should do this, and I will do it. And that's kind of music to a president's ears. So it truly does take a village for the league to do the great work that we do. And I thank you all for doing that. And I see some unfamiliar names. So for those of you who have not been to a league meeting, welcome. And if you find that you enjoyed the topic today, it will be posted on our website. And so you can watch it again in case you missed anything, or tell your friends about it. All right, Karen, it's all yours. Thank you.
We are still at 11:56, so I will wait a few more minutes because a lot of people do log on right at the time that the meeting starts.
Okay, does anybody have anything else they want to share?
Becky had a question that she sent me about the PowerPoint. Do you want to ask it, Becky? I think what she wanted here, there she goes.
I also need to know how many people knew about it or looked at it, and if they had any comments.
Yeah, that attachment was in Echoes, in the main issue of Echoes that went out at the end of October. So I have not heard from anyone. I did read the whole thing yesterday, found it incredibly informative, and was really impressed by the amount of work that you and the rest of the committee put into it. And I read through the 9 pages of glossary terms last night. I can't promise that I remember any of them, but I was really impressed with the thoroughness that you approached the issue with. So thank you, Becky, and thank you to Celeste Brody and Juliana Cartwright, because I know you all put a lot of work into that. If I missed any names, I completely apologize.
Well, that's fine. There were still some corrections that came in later, past the deadline. So if we ever want to use that, I need to clean it up a little more.
Okay. And if you want to have it sent out again in November echoes with the corrections, that's also an option.
Yeah, there was some talk originally about putting it on the Facebook page. I'm not sure if that's.
Or do you mean on our website?
Yeah.
Would you like to have it there? Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Well, after, yeah, not that.
After you
not-
edit it.
Yeah, the one you're gonna, yeah.
Perfect.
And we still have another minute, so I will wait until exactly 12 o'clock to give everybody an opportunity to log on who is interested in hearing the presentation live.
I sent Patrick some questions earlier on. Patrick, did you have those or should I send them to you again?
I took several emails, I think, from Karen and from Becky and a couple others folks, I think, contributed to those. And I put them in form. That's my very last slide. We can kind of use that as a primer as one idea. I also more than likely will run out of time. And so to be respectful of everybody's time, what I was planning to do was reach out to our technical experts on staff or point you in other directions and get you some web links where you can dig further into more information that's already been created. And then if there's remaining questions, I can always point you to our experts to get into those details. There's so many, like I said earlier, rabbit holes on water issues, whether it's water quality, stormwater, the permitting processes, lots and lots of really technical ways to go. And so my goal today is to answer questions, point you in the right direction, and give you a basic update on some of the work we're doing on the water side of things. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, don't pay much attention to mine. I think I can really get into the weeds.
oh no, it's I have to have a handler to keep me out of the weeds. It's so there's funky stuff, you know. I love the details. That's what it's all about. But when I see your eyes rolling back in your heads, and maybe the same thing with the reading at the library, if you're all falling asleep, I'm gone too deep. So
I got my pillow handy.
when I
Okay,
start talking water, my wife leaves the room. I'll just tell you that.
okay, so I think we're ready to start. I did want to let people know that we are on track to be meeting in person at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship as of January 6th or 4th, whatever the first Thursday in January will be. So that is all being planned, and you will be getting more updates about that in the echoes over the next couple of months. Again, for anyone who wasn't logged on, when I thank the Water Issues Study Group for all the preparation that they did for this meeting by sending us the slideshow about the Deschutes River Basin hydrology and the 9-page glossary of water terms. Thank you very much to Becky Powell, Juliana Cartwright, and Celeste Brody. Today, I'm very happy to introduce Patrick Griffiths, who is the Water Resource Manager for the City of Bend. He manages a broad portfolio of both surface and groundwater water rights in various stages of development. He does water-related integrated planning, policy, and legislative coordination. He manages the watershed special use permits. He complies with the Deschutes Groundwater Mitigation Program. He acts as a liaison with local irrigation districts and the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative. If that's not enough, Patrick also oversees the management of the Award Winning WaterWise conservation program he founded in 2001, which is a key part of Bend's long-term sustainable water supply strategy. Patrick also is a very good sport with a sense of humor, reminding me yesterday that the picture that went out with our announcement about this meeting was not actually him, and he handled it with grace and humor. So I'll let Patrick tell you a little more about that. Please welcome Patrick Griffiths.
Yay, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the invitation. I have to say, I have a favorite mug that I got from the League of Women Voters when I started way back in 2001. And it was a hand-painted LVW mug that somebody put together with a lot of love, and I still have it, but the paint is all worn off. So now it's just a white mug, but I drink out of that 2 or 3 times a week and think of you guys and realize that it does take a lot of interested people that care about topics, and water is one that I've fallen into my neck deep in for the last 20-something years. And so I'm really, really happy to be here today. And the picture is actually a picture of Dr. Michael Campagna, who I've spent many hours chatting about water issues. He's a longtime groundwater expert who's now on the staff as the managing professor at OSU in Corvallis. And when I have deep questions about water management, I give him a call and give him updates on how we're doing over here and stay engaged with him. And we've entertained many of his students here, his graduate students, his undergrad students, as well as visiting scholars from around the world. And so we've toured them around the Deschutes. And so I was honored to see his picture, but I really think his t-shirt is the best message there. Have you got water? So we can start with that. So as I bring up my presentation, I know we've got lots of great questions. There's lots of places to go on water, and I'm going to try to maintain a certain altitude today, but I'm always happy to stop and talk about certain issues. I also know from my teaching background that a lot of times everybody's coming at this with a different place and different level of knowledge. And so I want to be respectful of that to the extent that I can, and really, go back and make sure that you're understanding what I'm telling you in a way that makes sense. So with that, I'll just pull up my presentation and get started. And I am going to assume you can all see this. Someone give me a thumbs up. Once again, I think Bend would not be the same without water. We know that it is a key to survival for humans, as well as all the other organisms we depend on, the recreation, the economy, everything. It really is a key thread to life. And without it, we'd be in big trouble. I have been a professional worrier about water since hired in 2000. And I used it in my teaching before that as a theme, and really started to work with all the national and international, as well as statewide, regional, and local water experts, and have a broad set of folks that I go for. I am certainly not an expert on a lot of the details, but I really enjoyed working with the experts that get down into literally the molecular level in some cases on the water issues. Just a reminder, the city of Bend manages water, sewer, and stormwater. We're moving towards a stewardship approach, as the whole industry is across the West and across the US and the world. We're starting to call it that one water approach. And what I mean by that is there's no wasted water anymore. Every drop of water needs to be managed and stewarded from when we take it to when we move it through our system. And so I like to think of how Bend really tackles water from the urban water cycle. We have a stewardship role when we're in possession of it, and then we have to make sure that we're delivering it to the next user in good shape, is how we think about it these days. But today I'm mostly focusing on the water supply side. That's my expertise. And certainly there are questions around sewer, stormwater, water quality, both from the drinking water quality side as well as the sewer and water treatment side of things. And I'll try to attend to those as our time allows today. Here is the framework that I put together for you today. First and foremost, I want you all to understand that Bend is thinking a lot about water, and the way that we frame it now is, how do we provide a reliable water future for Bend? there's a lot of myths out there. There's a lot of misunderstandings, and there's a lot of facts that I want to bring to you today, and you guys can help spread the word on that. A lot of work to do still out there in the water world in the Western US for sure. Regional collaboration is another theme. We're not going to solve any of these problems without working together as a region. And that makes it really exciting, because right now I think the polarization level is as high as I've seen it in the 20 years I've been working on these issues. And we have to tamp that down as best we can to find solutions. The other, what I call conversation ending topic, is climate change. What are you doing about that, Patrick? And I get a good sternum thump from my friends. I'm holding you responsible, Patrick, for all these things, right? And so I think this is a topic that is very, very serious. And I've been really at the cutting edge of that for the last 20 years and have lots of experts from Phil Moat to all the others in the modeling we've done and downscale data. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then really what's Ben doing for managing the water that we are entitled to with our water rights, and talk about exactly the efficiency goals. I have some really, what I find to be a little bit of an EKG of my career, as I might say. I've got a 20-year graph that shows we've been doing a pretty good job with managing our water rights. And so I'll share that with you too as part of the show. And then I'm really interested in your questions today and what you guys are thinking about, and hopefully we can get to some of those before I run out of time. So let's talk about the Deschutes Basin real quickly. I think Becky's team did a really good job of assembling some really good information. So I took out a lot of my hundreds of slides on the groundwater Deschutes Basin, but I want to start with these. The overarching question I get regularly is, Bend's growth going to dry up the Deschutes Basin? And that's a great question, and I think it should be the first question you come to. And we can ask that again at the end of the show, and you guys can tell me. I'll talk a little bit today about our largest users of water in the basin and how Bend compares to that, because context is everything in the water world. If you don't understand who's using what, you don't know how to start fixing some things and shifting around things to make our future brighter on the water end of things. And then really talk a little bit about the Deschutes Basin Collaborative, and then that we're planning for the right water future based on climate and other new needs we're seeing in the basin today. Let me start off with some myths. I love the myths part. There's a lot of folks that get all wound up about golf courses, and if we could just get rid of all those golf courses, they're using all the water. Well, I'm not going to be a for or against golf courses, but and I don't want to be a proponent or an opponent here. I'm neutral. I'm agnostic about golf. But water users per square foot, what I am very concerned about, especially, is number one, the city of Bend delivers no water to a golf course. So just want everybody to understand that all the golf courses in town either have an irrigation district water right, where they're getting water diverted out of the Deschutes. They might have a private water right that they're pumping out of the Deschutes River or a tributary to provide that water, like over in the Waichus area, or they have a groundwater right. So again, it's all connected. It's all water out of our basin. Again, they're not the biggest problem that we've got. And frankly, from what I can tell from the analysis we've looked at, they're probably no worse or no better than the common homeowners' use of water on their grass per square foot, or no worse than agricultural, and maybe even a little bit better, especially if they're pumping and that minimizing their expense. But again, I want to make sure people don't get too wound up about golf courses. That's a choice that we have right now for land use more than anything. And I think it's, again, we're not planning around golf courses for the city of Bend's water supply, I guess, is the big message. There I have a vote for that. Thank you for that. The other piece of the breweries, we have a lot of, and maybe we can go on mute there. If somebody can do the mute button, that'd be great. The other information, we have a lot of folks concerned that all our water is going to the breweries and distilleries in Bend. We have a lot of the brewing industry here in Bend. I will tell you, our analysis has looked at those customers, and we have the large brewers like Deschutes Brewery, which use far and away more water than all the rest of the other breweries combined, but they're still less than 2% of our annual production, less than 2%. So again, we think they're being pretty efficient. We're not an expert on brewing, and they actually measure it in gallons per barrel of water that they produce, and they're pretty good with it. They realize it's all money. They've got to move that water around. So they're being relatively efficient and I think, again, not using up more than their fair share for the economics that they provide the community as well. The other myth that I find to be really interesting is there are a lot of people very, very interested in the use of water reuse and gray water. They are absolutely tools in the tool bag. I don't want to dispute that. They're not conservation. They are a source of water. And so here's how I view it. This is my personal view of both the use of water, reuse water and gray water is it has a cost, it has a benefit. And you have to look at that, number one. It has a public health risk that you have to look at. There's a cost associated with treating that water and making sure you're not harming the environment by not keeping it or harming the humans that might use it in the wrong way or how it's stored. So again, there's a lot of technical details in both of those solutions. And again, when you look at the opportunities there, we may or may not be nearing that solution as a source, but absolutely there are places in the world where it makes actually more sense than us right now. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to entertain that. I think eventually we're all going to have to be very mindful about how we use water, but right now our largest opportunities are not using a different source of water to continue being wasteful. Right now we have a lot of efficiency gains we can make, especially outdoors, depending on the source. It's almost irrelevant of the source. It really, if you're using too much water already, changing the sources doesn't make that good necessarily, if that makes sense. So these are the list of questions that I got from the team, and we'll come back to these. There's way too many to talk about right now, but let me just jump into the presentation and get started. The Deschutes Basin is one basin as a part of a much larger Columbia River Basin system. But again, all of the water that falls in that boundary ends up in the Columbia River near the Dalles. And I think we have to be mindful that water connects to a larger ecosystem, but we're limited on the amount of water that falls in that boundary line. And that's really our water budget that we have to share. The natural conditions in Bend here, as we look across the rabbit brush and sage prairie that we are building our community in, we get less than 12 inches annually and only about 5 inches of precipitation in the growing season to actually help feed the plants that we've got planted. The reason for that scene that you see here with the rabbit brush and sagebrush and bunch grasses, that's all nature could really support in terms of landscape material. And so keeping that in the back of your mind, that natural condition is what we can support today. Lawns and turf and other things take over 36 inches of precipitation in a growing season, and crops. And so I think keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about water budgets and what we can do. But the unique nature of the Deschutes Basin is really around the groundwater and our 100 inches of rain or snow that percolates in along the Cascade Crest. We call that the groundwater recharge zone. If you looked at some of the group's work on the groundwater studies and other things, it really was a real part of the background of my education, both in graduate school and as I dug into this water world. That's really the story here. We get an annual basin input of somewhere around 860,000 acre feet to 2.3 million acre feet, depending on the year. And that water moves through a lot of it. 80% of it in the Deschutes comes through the groundwater phase at some point. And so that's a really interesting and unique part of the Deschutes Basin I'll talk about as I go through here. So the regional collaboration really ties to how we've grown this basin. So there's a little bit of a closer look. Those colored shaded areas are the irrigation district boundaries. North Unit is the larger gray or brownish tan area around Madras. You've got the green one around Redmond, which is COID. You've got Arnold Irrigation District, which is the red under the Bend label. You've got Swally, Whiteshoes, Three Sisters Irrigation District, and then Ochoco out in Prineville. That 160,000 acres were the first really boundaries, political boundaries that we had as we started to settle this region in the late 1800s. And today they still use the lion's share of water, and I'll have a really good slide coming up on that. Then we've grown our cities around that. We have 9 Central Oregon cities on top or adjacent to these irrigation district boundaries. And remember, we have the county framework as well. We have at least 5 counties touching our watershed, and all of those county land use decisions are really allowing more growth with the use of exempt wells and other private water rights associated with that as well. So lots of players engaged in allowing new water demands to come to the fore. And again, I can talk till midnight about those issues, but they all come into play. We're all sharing the same water budget is the message. These are two maps from the state of Oregon. And let me explain what these maps mean. They do something called water availability calculations. And right now, if you see tan on this map, there's no water available to allocate surface water. And so if you look at the Deschutes Basin in January, we've got no water to allocate. All the surface water has been allocated, mostly since 1922. There's been no surface water to allocate. Most of it was allocated by 1900. If you look in August, clearly other places around the state, there's no water to allocate either. And this is pretty much true in all Western states and all Western basins. In fact, most basins are over allocated, which means they've issued more water rights than the streams can actually provide, depending on that water year. Remember, years are variable. There's averages, there's peaks and valleys, but there's no such thing as an average year. It's either a good year for you or a bad year, depending on your water right. So if you're out of surface water, what do? Well, you start drilling groundwater. That's been the answer in most basins in the West as well. And we're coming to terms with that. There was a lot of concern about the same issue in the 1990s. That led to the USGS study. That's a US Geological Survey came in and did a very, very detailed study in that green area. And it was declared the Deschutes groundwater study area. And it basically said, look, if you drill a well in that area, that well pumping can actually impact surface waters lower down in the system. And they used that scientific analysis to make a declaration that says, guess what? Any new wells you drill since 2002, you have to mitigate for that bucket for bucket, which means if the city of Bend wanted to go out and get a new groundwater right, I have to put an equivalent amount of water back in stream. And since there's no new surface waters available today to acquire to do that, I have to buy an existing water right and retire it or use it or lease it or find some other arrangement to mitigate for that water that I'd like to pump in the future. And that's true for all water rights that over a certain amount, again, doesn't apply to certain types of water rights, like what they call an exempt well, which is a very limited amount for a typical home. And so, but again, for Bend or any other city, you would have to mitigate for new uses. This is the graph. If you had to pay attention to one graphic today, this is the one. And there's a couple others I will say are also important. This is what I want you to take away and talk to your friends about. This is really what I call the magnitudes of use. When you're worried about growth and you're worried about Bend doubling in size or tripling in size or quadrupling in size, you know, when is the Deschutes Basin going to hit 1 million people? Well, probably faster than we're all ready for, correct? So let's just look at the existing diversions, not even water rights. Let's just look at what got diverted in 2020. That column on the left is an accurate representation of about 680,000 acre feet of volume that the irrigation districts diverted out of their streams and their water rights over the course of a 180-day irrigation season. So remember, this is about 6 months of the year. That's the amount of water that they divert out to their farms. Now, as that soaks in, as you look at that graphic, let me tell you 2 other important bits of information. Number 1, about 40 to 60% of the water they divert doesn't even make it to their customer because of the leaky canals and fractured basalt. I'll let that soak in a little bit, no pun intended, okay? And then secondarily, once that water does get to the farm, 20 to 50% of that water is lost in irrigation inefficiency. So we've got a turn of the century irrigation system that is not very efficient. So keep that in the back of your mind. That's a big opportunity as well. But remember, that 100-year modernization effort that hasn't been funded over time is a big, cumbersome politically charged challenge for all of us. We can't put it all on the irrigation district. We have to collaboratively find a solution. And they've come a long way. They're getting hundreds of millions of dollars of federal, state, and regional money to modernize their systems. And we can talk about that today a little bit. We can also talk about it in the future. But that's the big challenge we've got in our basin right now. That are the big surface water users. If you look at the smaller column on the right, the gray column, that's basically all the municipal water users in the entire basin as well. And we use roughly 40,000 acre feet a year. We use that amount of water over the course of 365 days as compared to 180 days. The other thing I will tell you that's astounding to a lot of folks is about half of that water that the cities and other big users like Avion and Roads use is collected in our drains from our showers and washers and so forth and sinks. It's returned to our sewage systems and treated and returned to groundwater. The only municipality that returns water to a stream is the city of Prineville. And they have an incredible wetland system that they use to treat some of that water before they return it back to that Crooked River system. But essentially, think of it this way. All the cities divert about 40,000 acre feet of volume a year, and about half of that is returned back to the stream system to be reused by downstream users. And I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind a little bit when you look at these numbers as well. I'll let that soak in just a bit, but that's the magnitudes of use difference. So if you're thinking big picture, I don't think you're going to see a challenge for increasing irrigation district uses in the future. There are some junior users on that list, especially North Unit. You hear a lot about it, recent media coverage, that has the most junior water right of all the districts. And they are out of water this past couple of years, as well as some of the other districts, because their water use or water rights are so junior, which means they are at the end of the line for being able to use water in a dry year. But on the other side of it, the cities, as we continue to grow, absolutely there's concern about where that water is going to come from. Most of it is being planned to come from groundwater. And I'll chat about that here in the next few slides as well. So what that means is I don't think we have a water shortage as much as we have a governance shortage. We have a water governance system that was created to allocate water, not to reallocate water. And what I mean by that is if you have an existing water user and you have to make them more efficient or have to retire that use in order for a new user to come in, you can imagine that creates a little tension. And I think that's what we're headed towards, whether it's the spotted frog, a Chinook salmon, a new city, a new, what I would call arrival to this region that needs a little bit of water for their home or business. There's going to be a challenge around that. And I think that's where I'm worried more than anything. But the good news is that Deschutes already has a long history of collaboration. When I started graduate school in 1996, that's the same time that the Deschutes Basin started a big collaborative effort to restore some of those depleted river areas that a lot of the public was being concerned about. That was the same time that the region was starting to be discovered. I moved to Bend in 1994 and taught school for 6 years, and water was a big focus of my science education classwork. But at the same time, when I entered graduate school, I jumped right in the middle of the groundwater mitigation program and that rule creation, and that was my lens coming into the water management world. And I told Bend, guess what, you guys? I think you could do a lot better of a job than you're doing today. And 20 years later, I have some interesting stories to tell about that journey. But the good news is we have a good collaborative effort. We have the Deschutes Basin study that just got completed in 2019, which is the best combination of surface water, groundwater, climate, and really good supercomputer modeling on future scenarios that we can meet new needs if we work together and find investment to do that. We also have the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative, which has been retooled from previous names. We used to call it the Deschutes Water Alliance. It used to be really more tied to the DRC, but now we're kind of realizing a new framework on that, and I'm really excited about what that's going to become over the next 20 years. But let me show you one of the planning study results, and this gives me a lot of hope, and hopefully it will help focus your energy on what to be concerned about. So again, this is the future needs out of our basin study, which we completed in 2019. Again, using supercomputers, the super smart people at the Bureau of Reclamation. We got $750,000 from the state of Oregon to match some grant money and a lot of local match and information that we compiled. I think Jim and Becky Powell are very instrumental in paying attention to that, bring it to that group. But here's some high level results that I kind of put into one slide. On the left, I put that same bar chart without the association of the various districts of the amount of water that the districts are diverting. I wanted to show you a comparison of what the future needs are cumulatively at the basin level. For all of the cities and large water providers for drinking water, we are looking a 50-year supply of about 16,000 acre feet. Pretty small sliver of water. Okay, but again, it's got to come out of the existing water budgets that are there if we're going to find groundwater to do that. The other new needs that we have is about 135,000 acre feet of water to meet the junior water rights needs and meet some of those in-stream flow targets in various reaches of the basin. And again, there's a lot of technical detail around what reach we're talking about, when they could get that water. Is it stored water? Is it natural flow? There's a lot of detail around that I won't go into. But this slide is there to give you the context to understand the opportunities, the fact that we're looking at what the future needs are. Now, if you put this slide in a drought year like last year, that 135,000 acre feet is not going to be enough to meet stream flow needs or junior water right needs. You're going to need maybe over 300,000 acre feet. So there's a lot of drought scenarios we're looking at as well. But again, in a median year, with a median water supply and a forecast around that, this is sort of what the target numbers are looking at. So as a planner, you've got to see the big picture, you got to see the whole field, right? But you'll also have to then pay attention to the details of what your needs are, when you need your water, and what kind of water you need. So let's talk about climate change. I have to look at water supply in the reality. I can't be wishful thinking. I can't pretend they're going to have any success in Glasgow with climate change improvements. I have to assess what reality is and what we're facing. And right now, the predictions in Central Oregon and the Cascades are, we have a range of forecasts that we've downscaled the data. We have the range all the way from we're going to have 3% less inputs in the basin to 11% more, depending on which model you look at and how you downscale that data. So that's a wide range of uncertainty, but Bend is already assuming that we're losing our mid-elevation snowpack. We're already assuming we're losing the glaciers that we've got in the Cascades, and we're assuming the worst because that's the day I have to plan for. I don't plan for the wettest day, I plan for the driest. And so I think there's a lot of great attention, and it really is something we have to be mindful of. Those drought maps on the bottom there are really what we have to deal with. But today, because the surface water and groundwater are so connected, you can't manage one versus the other. You have to really manage them collaboratively, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to pick those strategies, what I call the no regret strategies that Bend can take today. And that is, we need to be as efficient with every drop through its entire urban water life cycle. And let me talk about that a little bit more here as we go forward. So to really understand that, let me just stop there and just say that I have summarized a lot of this, and I'm skipping a lot of the details to really get to the point about how Bend is dealing with the details. But let's talk a little bit about history. I think folks on this call appreciate history like I do. You cannot be ignoring of how we got to where we're at, and it'll go forward. And so essentially, the city of Bend was not originally in the drinking water business until 1924, when the Deschutes River, which was the private water company's source, got condemned by the state health department. It was condemned because the water was being contaminated by upstream diversion and damming by the irrigation districts that created a high algae count. And that water tasted terrible. Sometimes it was harmful, sometimes it wasn't, but the taste and odor was atrocious. And so Bend Water, Light, and Power decided they wanted to divest of their water infrastructure. They sold it to the city of Bend. The city of Bend hired an engineering firm and went out and looked for a more safe and pure supply, and they picked the Bend Municipal Watershed above Tumalo Creek, and that is basically all spring-fed sources. We have a diversion on Bridge Creek since 1924 and have been diverting water since that time there when we took over the system. And so the good news is that water is delivered by gravity. It has a very low carbon footprint. It's very high quality, means that there was really no human caused pollution of that water. Our biggest risk of that surface water is from fire. I'll talk about that in a little bit here as well. The other source of supply, so there's our intake today. That's our existing diversion. The building on the right was rebuilt in 2015 and 2016. It has an incredible amount of electronics, measurement, filtration, fish screening, and all kinds of high-tech stuff inside that building now. The dam, or diversion dam, we call it, on the left, I want you to notice a couple things. Look how clear that water is. That water is incredibly clear. It boiled out of a spring not too many minutes before that. But essentially that diversion does nothing but raise the water level enough to get it into through the fish screens and into the pipe that's there in that building. And though that's been, again, working very well, rebuilt and updated to meet all the federal rules in 2016, and we hope to use it for another 100 years. Lots of other monitoring required as part of that reboot. We are now limited to 18.2 CFS diversion from that creek spot. And we'll also provide annual fish reporting. We also report flow and temperature, and that's the link you can go to find out all the data, what our special use permit looks like, what we're required to do. And we have a lot of real-time measurement gauges that you can click on and find out what the flows are at any given moment in time. So again, our goal is to be very transparent with the water that we divert, where we're diverting it from, what the impacts are, what the benefits are, and really, really come to terms with the trade-offs of any water choice that we have today. And there's always trade-offs. We did not have enough surface water to meet the growth demands that we had. And so since about the 1980s, we've been drilling groundwater wells. For a long time, the regional experts didn't think we had any groundwater resources at all, but after a lot of exploration in the 60s and 70s, we actually found out there's an incredible groundwater resource here. But again, no free lunch. It's connected directly to surface water. And you can't manage one without managing the other. And our first wells came online in the 1980s when we acquired some test wells that were drilled by a pulp mill that was being proposed for where the old mill district is today as a replacement for the large pine mills that were there. Again, today we use groundwater for essentially peaking demands in the summer. The good news is, here's a really simple graphic. We have that 1,000-foot elevation benefit of delivering that surface water by gravity to town, and we can fill all of our main reservoirs with surface water with very, very little use of pumping. And so if you think about the advantage of that in a carbon society where we're really trying to mitigate and also adapt to climate change, that's a supreme advantage. Our dual source systems, the wells you can see you have to pump from deep below. Our wells range in depth from 300 to 1,000 feet deep. And so we are plugged into the regional aquifer, which isn't as affected by seasonal changes or leakage from canals. Last year, we showed about 66% of our annual supply coming from surface water and only about 34% from that higher carbon footprint water of groundwater. So let's talk about the master planning. You know, master planning is really the engineering look of how do we move water to our customers and meet our regulatory requirements of both pressure, velocity, fire flow, drinking water, quality, and those kinds of things. You know, our system is pretty well spread out across a large area now, over 32 square miles of our UGB now. And so we essentially bring water all the way from Prowl Springs on the left in the Bend Municipal Watershed all the way across to 27th Street to the edge of our service area today. That takes a lot of infrastructure. Our water master plan was just completed and updated, and using 2018 data as the basis of future analysis. We essentially, have our 10 miles of raw water pipeline, 15 water storage reservoirs, over 400 miles of water mains network beneath your feet, 67,000 customers roughly in population, about 25,000 service connections. And if you think about it, that turns out we have about over 5,000 fire hydrants we manage. These fire hydrants are something I want you all to know about. A fire hydrant is the main hydraulic consideration we have when designing a system. We can meet 1,000 gallons a minute at any red hydrant in town. In commercial areas, we can provide 3,500 gallons per minute to meet the commercial needs of fire flow. If I'm providing that much gallons per minute at any one of these hydrants, I can easily meet drinking water needs. I can easily meet irrigation needs. When I add in reservoir storage on top of that, the biggest driver for pipe size and reservoirs is fire flow. So when you think about standing up a separate system to pipe non-potable water around for irrigation, the mechanics and costs of standing up that separate system is much more expensive than it would cost us to treat more water to drinking water standards. Because remember, we're getting drinking water that's safe for the public, protecting public health. We're getting water for the economy, whether it's brewing beer, serving water at restaurants, or providing water and cleanliness for pandemic treatment at the hospital, as well as meeting irrigation needs and fire flow needs. We're getting a multiple benefit from all of the water system that we have throughout Bend. So think of it in those terms next time you drive by a fire hydrant. That's just a little cutaway look. A lot of this infrastructure is buried in the ground. You take it for granted. We don't see it every day, except for those things poking out of the ground that are painted red in most cases. But when you see a reservoir being built or a street being dug up and repaired, that's what we're working about. So next time you get frustrated, you're stuck in a detour, think about the nice hot shower you took that morning and go, yep, it's probably worth it. And my toilet's still flushing and all that stuff's working every day. It's the first public service that you use every day. So again, we also looked at our condition assessment in the master plan. How good is the equipment that we've had installed since 1924 working? Do we have to rebuild it? Do we have to replace it? Well, the stuff doesn't take care of itself. So here's where we ended up. We studied, this is our service area in kind of the pinkish color, the tannish color. That's the city of Bend service area. The bluish below is the road service area. And then the tan to the right, the less reddish tan, is Avion service area. And so the boundary and the black line is our existing UGB. So you can see we serve water both inside the UGB as well as some of the adjacent areas next to us, like the Tethero Resort Development that we serve by agreement, as well as some other areas around town that are just outside the service area that still are within state rules. The projections that we use there are showing what our growth projections are over the next 20 years. That's required by state law. I really like to look 50 to 100 years out, and I think these are very, very conservative numbers. Both we look at the average day demand, the maximum day demand, and the peak hour demand, right? Peak hour demand also includes the potential for meeting the needs of fire in various certain parts of town. And so that includes conservation programs. We are investing $11 million in conservation right now over the next 20 years, which is a great chunk of change that we're excited about reinvesting in our conservation efforts and ramping those up going forward. But this is the overall, we're almost at $400 million to be expended over the next 20 years. The largest portion of that is in the red, and that is for condition improvement, rehabbing wells, rebuilding reservoirs, bringing them up to seismic standards, repainting, getting rid of the rusty tanks that are no longer going to serve us long term, rebuilding some pipes that are falling apart and leaking and getting replaced. So the largest share of that is condition assessment, repairs, and replacement. Remember, once you install a CIP project, you have to maintain it. You have to eventually replace it. And that's what that money is going towards. The bottom greenish tinted money is money we're spending to meet new needs for growth related, for fire capacity, and for meeting the needs of growth. And so once again, condition assessment is really our largest chunk of investment in this round of capital improvement budgets. So what does our water use look like? Where are our opportunities? Just in quick terms, when you look at the 2020 water production, that's our total water production combined, you can see a couple of tails there. During the winter months of January through April, we average around 6 million gallons a day. And I would say that's a very good proxy for the typical indoor uses in our homes. Drinking water, showers, laundry, restaurant use, but really that indoor water. But what happens in April? We turn on our irrigation systems and we see a peak increase of 5 times that to almost 25 million, 26 million gallons a day to meet the peak needs of summer irrigation. Most of that, again, when you look at the right-hand pie chart, 50%, 56% of our customers are single-family homes. The biggest commercial use that we have very much mimics the single-family pattern because of the irrigation district or irrigation requirements of those commercial buildings. You know, there might be an office building with nothing more than a bathroom and a coffee pot, but they have their largest water use might be their outdoor landscape. And I'm not talking about, you know, restaurants. I'm not talking about breweries, but I'm talking about a good portion of the commercial customers really behave a lot like water use from a single-family home. The biggest determinant of water use is not the number of people in a home, it's the size of the yard. So looking at that graph, where would you start your efforts for water efficiency and conservation? Clearly it's outdoors on the landscape. And that's what we're doing. We have a lot of successful programs that we're doing today. We are going to be ramping up some new measures, and next year we're going to start a collaborative, what we call a code alignment process to say, should we be bringing some new rules to bear indoor for our plumbing fixtures and reduce our water footprint there? Should we be changing our code related to landscape and irrigation? And what does that turn into as far as water savings and cost savings and avoiding future need for more water supply? So we looked at, and that's where that 10 million or $11 million of conservation investments are coming into play. So again, our WaterWise programs have been incredibly successful. We've achieved all the state requirements and meeting our water management conservation plan. I'll send you links to this group on that. We have a really what I call a data-driven approach. If you can't measure it, you can't monitor it, right? You have to really measure it to do that. Every single water meter in Bend is now tied to a SCADA system, which means I have 15-minute data by water meter. I know who's using what water when. I know when our peak demands are. I know when people are watering on the wrong day. I also have a very good idea of where our opportunities are to make folks and help folks be more efficient with that. We've won many, many awards in our conservation program over the last 20 years, and we hope to win more awards. But really, the proof is in the pudding. And I think what I want to show you now is certainly this is our projection of demand over the next 20 years to 2040. But we think we can lower that demand through more conservation and efficiency. And again, we have enough water rights in hand today to maybe get us to 30 years out in the future, if everybody conserves like we think they will. We have a very efficiency and conservation friendly community that really embrace it. And I think with our thoughtful approaches and data driven approaches, we can get a better bang for every drop we divert today. But here's my EKG of my career over 20 years, if I could call it that, just for fun. This graph is a graph of the last 20 years of our peak day. This is again one barometer of metric. We have essentially, let me break this down for you. A single peak day, this is the most water we produced on any given day in any given year. And that to me really is a testimony to keeping a control on our peak, and we're just not out of control, I guess is the good news. So in 2000, we were not even fully metered as a city. We became fully metered by 2004, but we've essentially doubled our service connections This is showing a little bit more meters than before, but we've got about 29,000 metered connections today. That includes some fire connections that weren't on that earlier number. But essentially, we've kept our peak day in check. The 2021 peak day is the same as it was in 2002. So if that tells you anything, that tells you we've been managing our water supply pretty well, and I'm pretty proud of that. We've got a really good team that works really hard to continue to manage leaks and do a lot more around that. So with that, I'll wrap it up and save some time for questions. These are some of the questions that I think I was sent by the League of Women Voters, and I'll stop there, and I really appreciate you guys listening, and really am excited about some of your questions.
I will start with a question from Molly. Patrick, would you care to comment on the city of the Dalles suing to keep secret the amount of water used by Google's data center, and comment on how behemoth corporations are scooping up water rights around the world?
Wow. Thanks for the easy softball question to start off with. I know a lot of the managers up at the Dalles, they've got their hands full. I think from the way I see it, we have the same issues in Prineville. We've got Facebook, we've got Apple, we've got data centers, a lot of water going to there. I think the public needs to know where the water's going and who's paying for it. I think the transparency has to be there. I hope we figure that out. It's not a trade secret. I think we have to be very transparent, because that water use is a trade-off from some other water use that's not going to. So that's my personal wish. That's not an official City of Bend position. I think you also want to remember something. There is some privacy concerns around individual water use, releasing data. I don't think shaming anybody in particular is a useful long-term approach to getting people to behave. But I think we do need to have categorically who's using what water for what benefit. And if the profits are going the wrong direction as well as the water, I think we need to adjust that over time. Remember I said earlier that water's not the problem, water governance is. That's my point. And so I'm glad that to help answer that question. So I'm not sure I have all the answers on how that's going to work out legally, but I can't wait to see how it plays out.
The next question is, should we preserve rights to groundwater or surface water, or both?
When you say preserve rights, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
That was from Molly. Molly, would you like to unmute yourself and give a little more information?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
When I first moved to Bend in the year 2000, I had a conversation with the, I'll call him one of the city's founders, who happens to own the old mill. And he said to me at the time, there was a discussion on whether or not the city should sell its surface water rights and retain only groundwater rights. Now, maybe we know a lot more now than we did then, but his view at that time, and maybe it's changed, is that we only needed groundwater, we didn't need surface water, we should sell it. And of course, I said, I think water is going to be even more important than oil. Why would we not retain both, just to be conservative? Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an easy one for me. I think people have a lot of opinions, some of them based on their own views of the world, but here's our view. In a climate changing environment, to have more than one source is money in the bank. And surface water and groundwater are absolutely linked together. Their groundwater is not a limitless, or it's not a resource that's just bottomless pit of water. We have to manage that. There's also great risk with groundwater quality in the future. I don't think we can dismiss that. So my point is, you saw the graph in the chart earlier, the cutaway, when we can take 65% of our water from the surface water system, at the same time still improving the flows in Tumalo Creek. That's a testimony to the collaboration with Tumalo Irrigation District and the City of Bend and a lot of very concerned citizens. I think we've limited our surface water diversion to 18.2. That water comes to us by gravity. That's a very low carbon footprint, and it can be protected from fire through some additional pretreatment options, which we're investing in. So I would not want to walk away from any water source in the future, including surface water. And so I would say pretty short-sighted to just go to one, put all your eggs in one basket.
The next question is about the environmental working group detected 15 contaminants in Bend water in a recent study, 5 of which exceed their health guidelines. How does our system remove contaminants?
Yeah, that's a great question. Environmental, that particular group, there's some challenges with that group and how they kind of move their media information out in a very unscripted way, and they kind of sensationalize some of those issues. I want to tell you right now, I am not a drinking water quality expert. I know enough just to be dangerous. And so what I would tell you is we look at that, we measure, we monitor, we sample every day. I can give you a link, and I'll provide this to you guys separately. But if you go to our consumer confidence report, that is our federally required annual report of water quality from all of our wells and samples through the system, as well as our surface water. And we've got a pretty good track record. I drink the water every day. And so I think this is why a lot of breweries and distilleries and restaurants come to Bend for its pure sources, both drinking water and both surface water and groundwater. And so there are contaminants of concern we're worried about. We're continuing to track those. We comply with all the federal regulations. And I think the point there is, are the federal regulations strict enough? And I would say, no, they're always evolving. They're going to continue to evolve. And we do regulate and monitor what we call the unregulated contaminants. We sample for those per federal schedule. And again, I would probably misinform you on what that schedule is, but roughly every 1 to 3 years, we sample certain things that aren't even on the federally controlled list to get ahead of it and see what those potential contaminants are. You might be watching things around arsenic. You might be watching things around hexachromium 6 and other things. You may be watching headlines around PFAS and some of the contaminants around there. Those are all things on our radar. We're looking at it. And Drexel Barnes is our kind of laboratory and water quality expert. And I would certainly put you in touch with them for more of those detailed questions and responding to those. But go to our website, look up water quality City of Bend. You'll get to the CCNR pretty quickly. And again, if you have specific questions, I would say best thing to do is to work with Drexel Barnes and his staff at the lab to talk a little bit about how those regulations work with our water supply.
Okay. There is a comment here from Susan Cobb. The recent IPCC report indicates we will have increased precipitation, but in extreme events, such as those causing flooding and landslides. And
Yeah.
Susan, did you want to make any other comments or questions with that?
Yes, I was just about to add in the chat, my question relative to that statement from the IPCC report is, how are we set up relative to floods and repeat floods within our water system?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sustainable water supply includes protection from these bigger storm events. We've had our biggest issues so far have been severe thunder showers up in the watershed. We had a fire clip a corner of our watershed in 1979, the Bridge Creek fire, and we're still seeing sedimentation events when the rainfall really hits high levels up there. It turns that clear water you saw on my slide to chocolate pudding. And right now, because of the LT2 rules, the long-term enhanced treatment rules that were promulgated in the 80s, and we finally met that rule by adding microfiltration of our surface water, so we can filter all that stuff out. And so we're going to invest in some pre-treatment that actually gets the sediments out ahead of the filtration to make those last longer and to be able to keep our throughput through the microfiltration system. And we're also going to put some plate settlers in there. And really what that does is two things. One, it fireproofs our surface water source. So if we had a major stand replacement fire up in the Bend Municipal Watershed, we would still be able to take that source of water. with that pretreatment in place. And so that's kind of a high priority for us to get that ready as a adaptation strategy. In town, we don't have as much flooding issues that impact our drinking water system, other than if a tree pops over and knocks out a pipe, we certainly have to be mindful of that. We did move our transmission line out of the woods, so to speak, and into the road, Skyliners Road. So that is less of an impact from trees that are falling in a wet environment. We are also looking at things like stormwater protection and stormwater investments to move water to the stream, filter out contaminants before it gets back to the Deschutes or to groundwater. And that's what our stormwater program is all about. And groundwater in general, stormwater program is really protecting groundwater from, hazardous chemicals and other things that could get pushed into the system due to those flood events. And so all of that is connected, and that's a great question, but we're looking at sustainable replacement of lines so that we're not in areas that are going to be impacted by flooding or landslides. We're in a pretty good, stable geologic area for most places around Bend, and we feel pretty safe around that right now. Plus, we have distributed water supply, which means we've got wells in place around town that can move water if we do have breaks or issues in certain areas, that we can still maintain people in water, at least for their indoor supply, in case of those kind of issues. And so we're thinking about that daily, and we're continuing to build a more robust system. And so, for example, if you've all survived the Newport Street shutdown this past summer and how inconvenient that was, you have seen three things happen in that one project. The sewer lines got replaced that were 35 feet down. Then above that, you had the water lines that were replaced on top of that, as well as replacing some of those stormwater pipes that are separate from all those at the same time. So rather than digging up a street 3 times, we dug it up once and replaced some of that aging infrastructure, including some old wood-staved pipe that used to deliver drinking water in that area, all at once. So we're being very mindful of our ratepayer dollars, both water, sewer, and storm, and trying to minimize impacts to the public as we make those kind of improvements with better materials, better valves, better shutoffs, and better thinking through the stormwater impacts of future floods and those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Okay, so it is 1 o'clock now. We still have 7 more questions. And you indicated that you do have time. Can we continue the meeting for about 15 minutes?
I am happy to stay on if you guys can tolerate me.
Okay. And then if we don't get to any of those questions within the 15 minutes, I will save the chat and I could send you those and perhaps get the answers from you and include them in our newsletter in the coming month.
We'd be more than happy to help with that. Luckily, we've super smart people that can help with some of those technical questions I'm sure that are coming.
Okay. So another question here is, given that so much water is leaked, what are your thoughts on piping the canals?
Oh, I'm a huge proponent of piping. Lining doesn't work because of the winter freeze-thaw cycle. Lining is an option, it's cheaper, but if you've ever experienced freeze-thaw at engineering scale that they're dealing with, it doesn't work long-term. It causes more breakdown and loss of investment later on. Piping, you can pressurize, you can gain some energy, and you can prevent that leakage. Remember, the one thing that a lot of folks don't talk about is we have been artificially recharging the aquifer in places where nature never put water before for the last 50 to 100 years, depending on which irrigation district you're talking about. And as we continue to pipe that water is not going to recharge those areas anymore. So when you read these headlines today about wells going dry, I'm going to guess most of the wells you're hearing about are wells that were drilled in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that were assuming that those leaky canals were going to go on forever. And they're shallow. They're probably within a half mile of a canal or a pond or a re-regulating pond in one of the districts. And so that's a challenge. But I don't want everybody to manage the basin by headlines. Those wells are not deep enough. They're not in the regional aquifer, and they're not in a sustainable situation. 500 CFS of lower river flows, roughly 500 CFS, were identified in the USGS study going into the lower river based on leakage from canals. And so if we're going to go away from that artificial recharge, what that means is you're going to see a lot more wells go dry as they continue to pipe and put the water back into the chutes. That is a cause and effect. In addition, the wells, the water that we pump out of the ground is going to have an effect as well. And right now, that's the largest question we have scientifically. You know, you always want to finger point. Well, no, they're doing it. No, they're doing it. It's like, no, we're all doing it, you guys. This is 100 years of history. We have to unwind slowly and carefully and build it back better, to use a term from another effort going on at the national level.
Mhm. What is the rate of water level decline of our aquifer?
That's exactly what I was just mentioning.
Okay.
It depends where you're talking about.
Okay.
Terms, the studies are showing, again, I depend on experts to tell me this. I work with my hydrogeologist friends for over the last 20 years, and the hydrology folks, the geology folks that are working at this. They have supercomputer models now, kind of looking at these questions, how much water's coming in, how much water's going out. We have a much better understanding of our giant aquifer. But remember, we're not an Ogallala type aquifer. We are kind of what we call a flow-through aquifer. The upper Deschutes is very, very unique. It's why we don't have a flooded river in town. That water that falls at Mount Bachelor soaks in. It doesn't, whether it comes as rain or snow, it eventually soaks into the ground and percolates down. So the closer you are, if you and I were drilling a well and you were next to the Cascades, you're going to find that your groundwater levels stay more consistent because you're closer to the recharge zone. The further you go east, the less reliable that water level is going to be in general terms, okay? But there is not a homogeneous aquifer there. You've seen walking through Shevlin Park, going down in the lava basalts of the lower Deschutes River and the upper Deschutes. There's all kinds of fractured basalts and pyroclastic flows and sedimentation that have happened and layered. We don't have an even layer cake here that's predictable. So there's lots of little mini watersheds, perched aquifers throughout the basin that get recharged in various ways. So really the question has to be, where is your well? Are you tracking it? Are you watching it? Are you monitoring it? And where do you think the recharge zone for that well is and how deep is it? Those are the questions that need to get asked. This aquifer doesn't act collectively like one organism in most instances, depending on where, again, where is the real key question there?
One question was whether you're going to answer questions that were already submitted. And Juliana mentioned this. Juliana, I know that there were a number of questions that were submitted. Is there one in particular that you would like to request that Patrick answer right now?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. This has been very helpful. What is the current plan regarding the city's diversion dam? I've heard different things about it.
Yeah, help me understand where you're coming from with that. We don't have any plans to take it out. The diversion dam I showed you in that picture was rehabilitated in 2016 through lots of NEPA planning with the federal government, our special use permit. So we're hoping to not take it out over the next 100 years. I guess I'm a little confused as to what some of the information you're thinking that's going away is coming from.
Well, I think I've heard it just generally that it can cause problems for fish and other habitat, the dam preventing fish migration.
Yeah, so I could pull that slide back up. I might try to do that. So that's probably a whole other topic. Where it was originally built in 1924 was way up in the watershed. Let me just kind of talk about it here. I'd say less than 600 yards from our diversion, the Bridge Creek becomes a rapid torrent that gets really vertical. And within less than a mile, there's a 90-foot waterfall, Bridge Creek Falls, that are there. And so there's a natural fish passage that was created in the Ice Age 18,000 years ago when Tumalo Falls was created. That whole ledge was created around the Ice Age that was there and created those large waterfalls both on the Bridge Creek side as well as the Tumalo Creek side. And so, yes, there's fish habitat. We've looked at it extensively. We studied it extensively. fish can move up. That's about an 8-foot diversion structure right now. We looked at fish passage, and for the amount of habitat above that, the biologists are mixed on that, right? Any good fish habitat is deemed to be critically important. This is a trade-off of any water diversion structure in the country and in the world, right? And so we look above there, and again, I'm not making a value judgment. Again, it's a trade-off. One of the things that the fish biologists have told me, working with the fish bios from the state and from the federal government, is that water is so cold and so pure and so wonderful that it is pretty bad for fish production, because the primary productivity of that water is so low, which means it doesn't support giant fish up there. So if you've ever fished on Tumalo Creek, you get a good 6 to 8 inch catch of brook trout, which are kind of out competing the brown trout, or out competing the native red bands there. And maybe there was some other native species there as well. But again, the distance between our diversion and what you're getting to those natural fish impediments is pretty short. But again, it's one of those trade-offs. So right now, I have not heard any discussion about adding fish passage there for the small amount of fish that might be moving up for a small amount of habitat in feet of actual stream that before it hits that waterfall. But certainly there's better, more priority places is what the fish bios are talking about down on the main stem Deschutes. And the highest value of Tumalo Creek water is really the habitat and refugia at the Tumalo Creek and Deschutes confluence. That's what we're talking about at the larger scale. So again, all water diversions are a trade-off from options. Does that help explain a little bit on why?
I'm fairly new to the community, so maybe I'm confused. I've heard a lot of excitement about the dam in town.
Yes, and so the very last, I can talk just briefly about it. We've been working on fish passage issues on the main stem Deschutes for as long as I've been here, and many, many years before that. North Canal Dam put fish passage in about 5 years ago. The districts found funding to do that. The last fish passage challenge that we've got remaining as a community is at the Mirror Pond Dam, which is owned by PPNL and produces a very small amount of hydroelectric energy. And so there's still talk about putting passage there, and I think they're continuing to discuss that. None of it's cheap, none of it's easy. Put a fish passage structure on one that probably needs to be rebuilt is a whole other level of discussion. And so we don't get involved in that from the ratepayer side. It's really not part of our drinking water system. But I think from the standpoint of fish and rivers, it's certainly connected to that side of things. Fish patches is definitely a necessity for genetics and all kinds of reasons that a fish bio can go on and talk about.
Thank you. So they're in charge, so to speak, PG&E or PP&E.
PPNL, Pacific Power and Light, owns that right now. And I think there's a whole lot of other complexity with dam ownership, underlying land ownership, water levels, all kinds of things. But ODF&W and the irrigation districts are all working collaboratively on that, as well as some of the nonprofits. And so I would engage at that level. They're doing some good work on that.
I think you've addressed some of this, but do you want to add anything else to this question? Have the aquifers in the state been mapped as to location and capacity?
Yeah, so the Secretary of State did an audit of the Water Resource Department in 2016. And one of the challenges that I mentioned earlier was this is a statewide issue. I've been on state committees related to integrated water resource strategy, right? So if the state in the West in general has no surface water left to allocate to any new need, that leaves groundwater as the next obvious supply. Well, groundwater is connected to surface water in every basin, not just ours. They all behave differently. You need some regional differences and solutions. And so as a basin moves from an unallocated surface water system to a fully allocated system, then groundwater begins to become that major supply. If they have shallow aquifers or surpass their recharge, the state is not up to speed on that. They don't have the funding, they don't have the staff. And so it really has been a kind of an ad hoc haphazard approach to groundwater analysis. I'll tell you, some of the smartest people I've ever met work for the state, and they are hamstrung by lack of staff, lack of budget, lack of technical time to go out and do that. But this is why we're looking at actually a regional basin by basin approach to kind of start to create that framework of analysis before you can start to issue endless groundwater rights if the resource isn't there. So it's on the radar. Again, like so many natural resource issues, we don't have the money, we don't have the staff, we don't have the attention it deserves right now. And I think that's changing, and there's nothing like a drought year to help focus that attention. So hopefully we're not letting this drought go to waste as far as rearranging some of the funding strategies we have at the state level. They're thinking about it, they're working about it. You need to talk to your legislature about it as well.
The next question is a security question. Can you comment on the pumps, wells, water processing plant security systems? Earlier, you mentioned this is a very volatile time politically. This question ties to that statement.
Yeah, I want to put down the fear-based questions that we've got. I think, yes, we are looking at federal mandates to do 2 major security upgrades. Number one, all of our facilities need to be properly secured. Number two, we're looking at our high-tech infrastructure and SCADA and computer systems and data as well. So those are the 2 areas that we're investing in. We are following the Water Infrastructure Act, which is a federal level approach to maintaining and managing all of our sites. And so we need to upgrade our fences, our security measures. You're seeing gates and access restricted and limited. We have reservoirs on all of the buttes around here, Overturf Butte, Pilot Butte, Rock Bluff. All of the reservoirs in town are secure sites, and we need to make them more secure. We also have this public demand for trails and recreation and dog parks. I think you're going to see a little bit of clash around that. What's the best use of that land? Is it owned by the ratepayers or is it owned by the city? That's another question I've heard from folks around town as well. We haven't resolved all that. We haven't invested in that, but in that condition assessment, we did identify security upgrades we need to make at all of our sites. But right now, we feel very, very good about our sites right now. We feel, especially after 9/11, there was terrorist concerns and other things, but that's certainly a big concern of ours as well. And we continue to have that as part of our daily routine of maintaining and managing all of our sites.
Okay, we are at 1:15 now. There are still more questions, and I think I can email those to you. I am hoping that the Zoom meeting isn't going to be cut off abruptly. Mimi, could you let me know if we have time to extend a little bit? What would people like to do? We can close at 1:15 and I can just send the remaining questions to Patrick.
Whatever you guys prefer. I have about until 1:30 available. Again, I cannot stress how important it is for groups like yours to be involved in water. I really appreciate your attention. And again, if I can direct any of these questions to more technical experts to get the answers you need. But I really encourage every one of you to Google City of Bend utility site. We've got an incredible amount of resources we have put on the web. Sometimes you got to drill down in it. You know how sometimes it's tough to get everything organized to find exactly what you need. So sometimes we can give you some tips, but we continue to update and upgrade our website as well. But most of the answers you can find there. And if not, we can point you in the right direction. People like Kyle Gorman at the Water Resource Department, all the irrigation districts are becoming more transparent about their actions every day. Drinking water, stormwater, wastewater. If you haven't taken a tour of the wastewater facility, get out there. If you haven't gone birding at Hatfield Lake and the ponds out there where we recharge the aquifer with our wastewater, get out there. It's great to see it in person. Any of the cities, Redmond, Bend, Prineville, some really world-class facilities. So we welcome you and encourage you to continue, but happy to take a couple more questions if you want.
Okay, and I will take you up on that offer. You are an incredibly knowledgeable speaker, and we still have 16 people on the call, so I think the interest is still there.
Gluttons for punishment, you guys. Gold star.
Okay, being that climate change seems to be making the accumulation amounts of water either bang or bust years, are there any plans for increasing storage for the far future, such as new reservoirs?
Yeah, we looked at that in the basin study and more from the irrigation district's perspective than the city's perspective. I will say, let me answer that in two ways. Number one, the city of Bend is using the regional aquifer as our large reservoir of future needs. Again, regional aquifer, down low, stable, reliable, recharging at a rate that is not exceeding its capacity for recharge. The districts, on the other hand, are a different ballgame. I think you saw those graphs I showed you earlier. They looked at in that study, but these are billion-dollar solutions for irrigation district needs to store some of that water. That is going to be one of the solution portfolios that we have. But remember, storage has impacts too. When you store water, you have to take water out of partial year flow, and so there's no silver bullet. But I think the West in general and the world in general is going to have to rethink how it uses stored water that don't impact fish, that don't impact wildlife, that don't impact natural flow regimes, that all that ecosystems were designed around and grown around and evolved around. And so again, no silver bullets there, but we're looking specifically, when I say we, I'm talking about the basin. I'm not talking about Bend, but collectively, basin experts are looking at downstream reservoir storage that would have less impact to stream flow during the wintertime. One alternative. Again, there's maybe some cheaper ways to do it sooner, and efficiency being a big part of that.
Okay. The next question is, how are we making sure that good, clean water remains affordable for all residents?
Wow. That is probably the biggest question coming down the road, and we are kind of stumped about what to do about that. Water is not free, and this is one of the challenges I will tell you in the national conversations that I've had. All of that infrastructure I talked about today takes money to operate, and so what we have to do and what we've been asked to do by Congress, by our council, and by others is to make sure we have a system of affordable water supply. There are some that feel that it's a right, and I'm not going to disagree with that. But again, that's a public choice that we have to come to terms with. But we take water out of the system for free, and what it costs us is it's a public good that we then get a water right for and have rules to how we have to manage it and how much we can take out, and we report on that use every year. But to get that water to your tap in a safe and affordable way takes a lot of time, money, and staff to do that, and then replace that equipment over time like we're doing today in our budgets. And so water will continue to go up. It's still less money, or depending on how you pay for it, there's a lot of ways to look at it, but it is going to be continually expensive, and even more so on the wastewater side as we continue to treat wastewater. So I think we're going to have to think more broadly on how to make it equitable and affordable for others, create some funding streams to help it. Just like we're dealing with the houselessness crisis, we're going to have to find funding streams to buy down water for those that are less able to afford it on some kind of a sliding scale. So stay tuned to that. I don't have any answers, but it's clearly going up at a faster than the rate of inflation as far as water, wastewater. And again, partially in recognition of the underinvestment we've made in water and the way we've taken it for granted and undervalued it for the last 100 years.
Okay, here's another question / comment. Another possibility is to put solar panels above the canals, get a twofer, more electricity, less evaporation.
Yeah, there's lots of great ideas. There's no shortage of creative ideas out there. I think there's a lot of challenges around that particular engineering solutions. But you give an engineer a dollar, and they're gonna find a creative way to spend that dollar on those kinds of things. I will tell you that the city of Bend has some land adjacent to our water facilities. We put in solar power both on the roofs of our new treatment plant as well as some adjacent land that we were not going to develop and put solar panels on it. We're looking at city sites to do that on top of buildings. we're looking, and you can see this region-wide, they're using some unproductive farm fields to put solar panels on. We think that's certainly a part of the mix in there, but there's a lot of folks that are looking at that. Canals in general, they are generating some hydroelectric energy on the piping the canals with the pressure. And remember, by pressurizing and piping some of those canal solutions, they are decreasing the amount of water that those farmers might have to pump out of their ponds. So there's a lot of energy in the mix. When you move water, you're moving a lot of energy as well, and potential energy. The districts have been incredibly mindful of that and have put in some in-conduit hydro where they're not diverting more water, they're just generating water on the water rights that they have. The city of Bend is also looking at adding hydro generation to its existing diversion, not diverting more water rights, but getting generation on the water that we're diverting already. So we'll be looking at that in the future as well to, again, lower our carbon footprint, both mitigate and adapt to the climate future of getting our carbon house in order, so to speak.
Next question, with the Build Back Better federal monies, where will that money go in Central Oregon?
Boy, that's a question I keep asking. We don't know enough of the specifics yet. We think a lot of our climate adaptation and resiliency projects like pretreatment, like hydroelectric, like acquiring more land for some of these groundwater well facilities that are protected from future impacts of contamination and fire and other things, are all really good uses of that money from the infrastructure and water side. But we also need money for forest management. We also need money for the wastewater side and the stormwater side. So we're looking at how that language comes out. We're going to be trying to use some of those monies and apply for some of those monies once they finally get that bill finally passed and that it gets back through the state to issue some of that funding opportunity. We used similar money in the past in 2000 and 2007, 2008. You might all remember ARRA money. We were successful in grabbing several $1 million of that funding to completely fully meter and AMI meter, automate our entire water system then. So we hope to be able to capture some of that money as well.
Can you talk about the stormwater hearing and that is with the Department of Environmental Quality, what that is about? Are you aware of that?
Yes. So stormwater has a different kind of permit. We have two types of stormwater facilities, both NPDES permits as well as water pollution control permits. Those are really technical, and basically we're trying to protect groundwater quality as well as surface water quality in general terms. So any water that runs off our streets and ends up in the Deschutes River or tributaries, we want to make sure we're pre-treating it as much as possible and minimizing the impacts to the streams. Same for groundwater. If you have a groundwater swale where the water percolates in, we want to make sure that we're not putting a bunch of toxic chemicals or PFAS chemicals or other things where it can percolate down into the regional aquifer. And so those are the areas that we look at. We also have a huge portion of that related to education, outreach, making people aware of where their water goes and its potential impacts on the environment. So it's a big system. We have to look at, again, managing the drops coming in at the top of our system as well as what's coming out the other side and in town. Where does that water go after a rainfall? Does it head to the river? Well, some parts of town it does. Does it go into the groundwater? Yes, some parts in town it does that as well. And so we have to be mindful of both. And those permits are the technical way to meet those federal rules around that. And the state manages that through the Department of Environmental Quality.
Okay, here is a comment. There's a good deal of funding, as you just earlier mentioned. So the concern for state aquifer assessment and management is not considered for this funding, even though across the state, we must use the aquifers because service water is all over allocated.
Yeah. Yeah. So once again, I think there's a brand new effort underway in the governor's office to get everybody at the table to kind of prioritize some new investments at the state level. Groundwater is at the top of the list of that funding need, and that's in just about every basin in the state. And so depending on where you're at, you saw a map from me earlier that kind of showed the groundwater study area. Let me see if I can circle back to that map. This is a map of the groundwater management areas in the state today. And so all those colored areas have already been researched, and they're looking at recharge efforts, they're looking at protection efforts, they're looking at limiting it. Our study area is probably the biggest in square miles as far as an area that's connected to surface water and the scenic waterway protections. But again, groundwater is an area that needs more investment, more attention, and more help. And so the state is aware of it, and they're working with the legislature to find more funds to do that. And federal funds are going to be a piece of that as well, hopefully.
Okay, we are at the end of the questions that appeared in chat. So I wanted to thank you for your incredible presentation. You're obviously very knowledgeable, and you're a great science teacher, hearkening back to your years as a middle school science teacher. So thank you again, Patrick. And for anyone who is still on the call, I wanted to let you know that next month our speaker will be Bobin Singh, who is the director of the Oregon Justice Resource Center. And he will be talking about corrections issues, criminal justice issues across the state of Oregon, and policy that affects us here in Bend and Deschutes County. That is it. And thank you again, Patrick.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. And I look forward to working with you again. And I'm going to go find my League of Women Voters coffee cup and have a cup right now. So thank you all very much. And hope to see you guys around town when we can all meet in person again soon.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome.